Friendship had never been easy for me. As far back as I can remember, people seemed to connect with each other like pieces of a puzzle, while I was that piece that never fit. I watched, tried to understand, but something always seemed to slip away. Maybe it was the way I interpreted words, how long it took me to catch nuances, or simply how the noise of the world sometimes left me paralyzed. But the stars? Oh, they were different. Always there, in the same place, predictable, constant. I understood them in a way I never understood people. In the night sky, I saw order, a refuge where everything made sense. Polaris would always be there, illuminating the north. Orion would continue his watch, bow ready, facing the skies. It was comforting. At school, however, the sky wasn't visible, and the chaos seemed to intensify. The hallway was a whirlwind of sounds, voices, footsteps, lockers slamming. My solution was simple: headphones and a notebook to retreat into. While my classmates chatted, I drew nebulae, black holes, and constellation diagrams. That day, we were in science class, and Mrs. Robinson, a patient and attentive teacher, announced we would do a project in pairs. My heart tightened. I already knew how this worked. No one would pick the weird girl, so I usually ended up working alone. It was easier that way. Before I could raise my hand to ask Mrs. Robinson if I could work alone, Jake Miller turned to me. "Emily, right?" he asked with an easy smile. "You like astronomy, right? How about we do the project together?" I hesitated. Jake was different. Popular, charismatic, always surrounded by friends. He seemed as out of my reach as a shooting star. "Why do you want to work with me?" My voice came out harsher than I intended, but he didn't seem bothered. "Because you clearly understand this way better than I do," he replied, laughing. "And, honestly, astronomy is fascinating. I want to learn." There was something in the way he spoke, something that seemed genuine, but I was used to being skeptical. "Okay," I muttered. Not because I trusted him, but because it seemed less complicated than saying no. Working with Jake was different. He had an unsettled energy, always asking things, changing subjects, and yet seeming incredibly focused on me. "Why do you like astronomy so much?" he asked in the library as we flipped through books for the project. I hesitated. It wasn't a simple question for me, even though it seemed like one. "Because the stars are constant," I finally said. "They don't change. Even when you can't see them, they're still there." Jake was quiet for a moment, which was rare. Then, he smiled. "That's amazing. I never thought of it like that." That was the beginning of something I couldn't define. Jake seemed truly interested in hearing what I had to say. He didn't interrupt, didn't pretend. But, at the same time, I felt a barrier. It wasn't his fault. It was mine. I was afraid he would be like the others, someone who, eventually, would get tired and move on. He noticed when I got too quiet. "Are you okay?" he would ask, and his concern seemed genuine. That confused me. One day, he showed up in the library with something that left me speechless, a handmade model of the solar system. It wasn't perfect, but it was impressive. "I made this for us to use for the project," he said, a little embarrassed. "What do you think?" I looked at him, then at the model, feeling something I couldn't name. "It's good," I murmured. "Just good," he laughed, but didn't seem offended. I wanted to say more, but the words were stuck. "Thank you," was all I could manage. At that moment, something changed. Jake seemed different from anyone I'd ever known. Maybe he really did want to be my friend. But the world around us wasn't so kind. When other students noticed that Jake was spending time with me, the comments started. They weren't direct, laughter, looks, whispers, but I noticed everything. Jake did too. "Do you care about what they say?" I asked one day, while we worked on the project. "No," he replied seriously. "They don't really know me. And they don't know you either." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust. But trusting was something I'd never learned how to do. For me, trust was like a scientific experiment, something that had to be tested multiple times before being accepted. And Jake seemed determined to go through every test, even if he didn't know it. He kept showing up, bringing ideas for the project, asking about the stars, and trying to convince me that I was more interesting than I believed. "You're like an encyclopedia of astronomy," he said one day, smiling. "Only better, because you explain it in a way even I can understand." I laughed, something rare for me. Jake had this ability to disarm my caution, but at the same time, it made me uneasy. What if he got tired of me? What if he was just being kind out of politeness? My doubts grew even stronger when the whispers from our classmates turned into louder comments. "Jake, why do you hang out with her?" someone asked during lunch, loud enough for me to hear. Jake laughed, as if the question didn't bother him. "Because she's amazing," he replied, with a naturalness that left me baffled. But I couldn't just ignore how he handled it. Even if Jake was genuine, the people around us weren't. And I knew what happened when you got too close to someone like me. Eventually, people would pull away. Jake seemed to notice my hesitation, even when I tried to hide it. "Do you think I'm going to stop being your friend because of them?" he asked one day, as we walked home after school. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. "Look," he continued, "I'm not saying it's easy. But I'm not the type to give up on people, especially someone as cool as you. I just want you to know that." I wanted to believe him. Part of me even did. But the fear that he would turn out to be like everyone else still hovered over me like a cloud. The sensory meltdown happened at the worst possible moment. We were in the cafeteria, where Jake had insisted on having lunch with me. The noise was unbearable, trays clattering, laughter, crosstalk like a tangle of wires I couldn't untangle. My heart raced, and my breath became shallow. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, leaning toward me. I couldn't answer. Everything around me seemed amplified, the sound, the fluorescent light, the smell of food. It was like being trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Before Jake could say anything else, I got up and ran out of the cafeteria, ignoring the looks and whispers I knew were following me. I found refuge in a quiet corner of the hallway, where I finally managed to breathe. Jake appeared shortly after, bringing a cup of water. He sat beside me, quietly, until I finally calmed down. "Does this happen a lot?" he asked, his voice gentle. I wanted to explain, but the words didn't come. How could I make someone understand something I couldn't even explain completely? "Sorry," I muttered. "You don't need to apologize," he said, with a smile that didn't seem forced. "I just want to know how I can help next time." That simple sentence stayed with me. He wasn't asking out of curiosity or pity. He wanted to understand. But the world outside wasn't as understanding as Jake. Days later, a group of classmates started making jokes about Jake wasting his time with me. I knew he didn't care, but I did. That's when I decided to pull away. I stopped replying to Jake's messages, stopped meeting him in the library. I retreated into my shell, convinced it was for the best for both of us. Jake, however, didn't accept that easily. He showed up at my classroom door during break, holding the solar system model he had made. "You're avoiding me," he said, straightforward. "It's not that," I lied, looking anywhere but at him. "Then what is it?" he insisted. "Because, if you think you're protecting me from something, you're wrong. I don't care about what other people say." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, but the fear was still greater. "All right," he said finally. "But know that I'm not going anywhere." He placed the model on my desk and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and, for the first time, a spark of doubt. Maybe he was really telling the truth. The spark of doubt that Jake had left with me slowly grew in the days that followed. I looked at the solar system model on my desk and wondered if, perhaps, he really was different. Then, one night, I got a message from him. "I need to show you something. Meet me at the park at sunset. I promise you'll like it." Reluctantly, I went. When I arrived, I saw Jake adjusting a small telescope under the transitioning sky, the orange and pink colors blending above us. He looked up and waved, his smile as warm as the colors in the sky. "You came," he said, as if that was an accomplishment in itself. "What's all this?" I asked, looking at the telescope and the small notes scattered in a notebook. "I thought maybe you could show me the stars," he said, his eyes sparkling. "I want to understand what you see." I was surprised. It was rare for someone to want to enter my world, and even rarer for someone to do it with such eagerness. He handed me the notebook, where there were doodles of constellations he had clearly researched. Some were wrong, but the effort was more than I expected. We spent hours there. I showed him Polaris, the Orion Nebula, and the Pleiades. I told him the stories I loved about the stars, stories I usually kept to myself. Jake listened intently, as if every word I said was precious. When I finished, he said something that stayed with me. "I understand why you like them. They're constant, like you said. But they're also so vast, so full of possibilities." It was then that I realized Jake wasn't just trying to be my friend. He was trying to show me that my world had value, even if others didn't see it that way. After that night, something changed. Jake and I began to work more diligently on the science project, but this time, it felt like more than just schoolwork. He wanted our presentation to be special, something that reflected how much we had learned together. "Let's make a scale model of the solar system," he suggested one day. "But not just that. I want people to see what you see." I hesitated. "This will draw attention." "And what's wrong with that?" he asked, tilting his head. The problem was that I didn't want to be the center of attention. Standing in front of a room full of classmates felt like a monumental task. "Jake, what if I can't do it?" I asked, finally letting slip my biggest fear. He placed his hand on my shoulder, something no one had ever done without making me uncomfortable. But with him, it was different. "You will. And even if you don't, I'll be there." His words gave me courage, even though the fear was still there. The day of the presentation came too quickly. We were in the science lab, adjusting our model while the other groups presented. The noise around me made me restless, and Jake seemed to notice. "Remember the telescope in the park," he said, his voice low, "just for me." I nodded. "Pretend we're there. Just you and me. The rest doesn't matter." Those words were enough to make me stand when our group was called. Jake started the presentation with his laid-back manner, making our classmates laugh and relax. Then it was my turn. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the eyes on me. Jake gave me a small nod, a silent sign that he was there. I took a deep breath and began. I talked about the vastness of the universe, how the stars were so much more than bright dots in the sky, how they were stories, science, and beauty all at once. My voice trembled at first, but as I went on, I felt something change. It was as if, for the first time, I was showing my world to people, and even if some didn't understand, it didn't matter. When I finished, there was a brief silence before the applause began. Some were polite, others genuine, but I didn't care. I looked at Jake, who was smiling as if I had just unraveled the mysteries of the universe. As we returned to our seats, he whispered, "That was amazing." For the first time, I believed him. The sense of relief after the presentation was palpable, but deep down, I knew something had changed. For the first time, I felt that maybe I wasn't as invisible as I had imagined. In the following days, Jake seemed even more excited. He kept talking about how the presentation had been a success, about how we had shown something special to the class. I liked listening to him, even if I didn't always know how to react. It was on a quiet afternoon that I received another message from him. "Tonight. At the park. Something special. Trust me." I almost turned it down. After everything, the thought of being near other people again, even with Jake by my side, made me nervous. But something inside me told me I should go. When I arrived, I saw that he wasn't alone. There was a small group of classmates around an improvised table with some snacks, an open notebook, and the same telescope from before. My heart raced. "You made it," Jake said, walking toward me with a smile. "I've been waiting for you." "Who are they?" I asked, trying to control the anxiety that was already rising. "Some friends," he said casually. "I told them how you understand everything about stars, and they needed to see it. You're gonna love them. They're cool, I promise." I wanted to run away. I was about to make up an excuse, but then Jake placed a hand on my shoulder, and his gaze met mine. "You can do this," he said softly. I took a deep breath and approached. Jake began speaking, enthusiastically explaining what he knew about astronomy, using some things I had taught him. Then he looked at me. "Now it's your turn." I hesitated. People were looking at me, waiting. I could feel my body freezing, but Jake kept encouraging me with his eyes. "Well, there's Polaris," I started, pointing to the sky. My voice was quiet, but the words began to flow. I talked about constellations, the myths, and the science behind them. Slowly, my nervousness gave way to the passion I had always felt for the stars. Some of Jake's classmates began asking questions, and to my surprise, they were genuine. One of them said, "I've never thought about it that way. This is amazing." For the first time, I felt that my world was being seen, and, somehow, accepted. When everyone left, Jake and I stayed to clean up. "I knew you could do it," he said, smiling. "Why?" I asked, looking at him. "Because you have a unique way of seeing the world," he replied. "And I think that's what people need." As we looked at the sky, I realized he was right. Maybe I had something to share, even if it wasn't obvious to everyone. The following days were different. Not because the world around me had changed, but because something inside me had. I felt that, somehow, I had taken a small step out of my shell. Jake continued to be there, as always. Our friendship seemed stronger now, built on something deeper than words or social conventions. He understood when I needed space and knew when to gently nudge me out of my comfort zone. One day, as we walked through the school, I noticed some classmates who had been at the park waving at me. It wasn't much, but it was something. I waved back, feeling a little less invisible. It was that same afternoon that I decided to do something I never imagined. I passed by a store and saw a small model of the solar system. It was simple, but well made. I picked it up, feeling a wave of anxiety, but also determination. When I gave it to Jake, he was silent for a moment, looking at the model in his hands. Then he laughed, but not mockingly. It was a soft laugh, full of gratitude. "You're trying to outdo me, aren't you?" he joked, but his tone was full of affection. "It's nothing," I murmured, looking at the floor. "Nothing?" He placed the model on the table and looked at me. "Emily, this is everything." As he smiled at me, I felt something I couldn't put into words. Maybe it was joy. Maybe it was gratitude. Or maybe it was simply realizing that I wasn't as alone as I once thought. That night, looking at the starry sky, I felt a peace I had never felt before. The stars were still there, constant as ever, but this time, there was something more. Perhaps, with Jake by my side, my world could be as vast and full of possibilities as that endless sky.